Just by Radiohead is chock full of different types of chromaticism. Key changes, diminished scales, modal interchange, blue notes. We start with a C major chord, placing us by default in the key of C major. But by the second chord, we've already got something that doesn't belong there. This E flat doesn't belong in C major, instead being borrowed from the parallel minor scale. So this is modal interchange, when you borrow a chord from a parallel scale. And when I say parallel, all that means is other scales starting on the same note. So C minor is the parallel minor scale to C major. Then we hit the third chord in the riff, this D major chord. D major doesn't belong in C major or C minor. D major is borrowed from a different parallel scale, C Lydian. So we're only 3 chords into the song and we've already had a bit of major, a bit of minor, and a bit of Lydian. And then we get an F major chord, which does belong in C major, so we're switching back to the major here. So this opening riff alone is a brilliant example of modal interchange, swapping tonality with each chord change. Now, despite all of these chromatic chords, this opening riff still sounds very logical, very cohesive, like these chords belong together. And the reason for that is that this riff uses sequence. Sequence is a technique I've discussed before where you establish a phrase, "Lights go out and I can be saved," and then repeat it up or down in pitch. "Tides that I tried to swim against." So in Just, we get this initial phrase, which is a major chord that moves up a minor third, and then we get the same phrase. So because this phrase is being repeated, it sounds cohesive, it sounds like it makes sense. It's also fairly obvious that this opening riff from Just is inspired quite heavily by another band. But one major thing that Radiohead do differently to Nirvana is that Radiohead play their riffs with full major chords, not just power chords. Power chords leave ambiguity because they've not got a major or minor third. If the opening riff for Just didn't have the major thirds in the chords, the riff would purely be in C minor with a little bit of modality from the A natural that is in this D5 chord. So a lot of this chromatic interest, a lot of this modal interchange is coming from the use of major chords instead of just power chords. So that's enough of looking at just the first 2 bars of the song. Let's have a look at what happens next. So next we get this classic ascending tremolo guitar line. This line climbs up a diminished scale, also known as an octatonic scale. Diminished scales alternate between tones and semitones. You can actually get 2 types, one that goes semitone, tone, semitone, tone, etc. And the other scale is the opposite, going tone, semitone, tone, semitone, etc. And it's this second type, the tone-semitone type, which is what we've got in Just. The chord progression from the opening riff continues at this point, and the diminished scale fits in perfectly with these chords, each note of the scale lining up with a chord tone of the chords below. Now let's move to the verse. The verse gives us even more chromaticism. It lands on this A minor chord, which features an E natural, but the vocal melody is singing an E flat. So the E flat in the vocal rubs up against this E natural in a way that is very reminiscent of the blues. This type of chromatic note is often referred to as a blue note. The sound of the blues ultimately comes from having both the major and the minor version of the third being played at the same time, so they're rubbing up against each other, creating this sense of tension, this sense of dissonance. This use of 2 different versions of the same note, in this case E natural and E flat, at the same time is sometimes referred to as a false relation. The tension created by this false relation is then resolved on the second chord, this A flat major chord, because the A flat major chord contains an E flat, so we lose that E natural. So let's look more closely at the chord progression in this verse. We start with the 6th chord from the major scale, the A minor. and then we slide down onto the 6th chord of the minor scale. Then we get the 3rd chord from the minor, followed by the 4th chord from the major. This all then repeats, although now instead of an F chord, we have the 7th chord from the minor scale, this B flat. So Radiohead are really mixing both major and minor chords here. We've almost got equal parts minor and major. As we approach the chorus of the song, we get this section. This G flat here is really interesting. It slides us down from the G major chord to the F major chord. And it's what I would call a blue chord, a blue note that has been built into a chord. The flattened 5th, which is what this G flat is a classic blue note being pulled from the blues scale, and it allows us to slide from the 5th degree down to the 4th degree smoothly. And then finally we land down in the chorus of the song, and for the first time Thom doesn't sing an E flat, he sings an E natural. You do it to yourself, you do. That's why So far in the song, Thom has been singing that E flat against an often major backdrop, so we've got that blue note feel. Now he's singing the E natural, so we're losing some of that blue sound. In the chorus, we also get this G flat chord again, but this time it's not sliding us down from the 5th to the 4th like it was before. Now in the chorus, we get a C major moving to a G flat, which is a tritone. And tritones are one of the most dissonant intervals you can get, sometimes nicknamed the devil's interval. This tritone creates a brilliant tension here that then resolves when the G flat slides down onto this nice consonant F major 7 chord. You do it to yourself, you do. So our chromatic adventure isn't over yet. Later in the song, for the bridge, we get a key change. So here for the bridge, the song shifts into E Dorian. Now you might say this is just E minor, but we get this raised 6th here, this C sharp. In E minor, we would have a C natural, not a C sharp. Now in this key change, we pretty much get another diminished scale like before, although this time it's not as clean cut as the other diminished scale was. The problem is when we hit the 5th note of the scale here, it should be a B flat if it's a diminished scale, but what actually happens is the note gets bent up to a B natural, so it sort of starts as a diminished scale, but kind of morphs into a normal minor scale. But it's still achieving a similar effect to the diminished scale from earlier, and it harks back, so it helps tie this section that's in a new key to the song we've had so far. The last part of the song I want to look at is the outro. The outro introduces a new chord progression that we've not heard yet. So allegedly, Just is the result of Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood having a competition to see who could fit the most chords into a song. So perhaps this outro section, this coda section, is a last-ditch effort to get as many chords into the song as possible. And you know I mentioned earlier about power chords, well we've actually effectively got some power chords here. Some of these notes, like the A chord here, is just an A5 because it's only being sounded in the bass, so we haven't really got a fully fledged chord. So there is another music theory dive into a Radiohead classic. If you have any other suggestions of songs that I should look at, Radiohead or otherwise, then please leave them in the comments down below. And thank you so much for getting me not only over the 10k mark, but over the 13k mark. As a celebration, I'm going to put together a Q&A video. So if you have any questions about music or just about me and my background, then leave them down below and I'd love to answer them. Thank you again.
Some of the lyrical themes that have gone on this album itself, there's different themes. You know, it seems the song Just itself, it's a bit about someone's own self-destructiveness. Is that really what you were thinking of when you wrote that yourself?
It was quite. It was just from someone I used to know that I mean you know who was just bent on complete and utter self-destruction. But it was also like trying to get out of it as well. It was like spitting on it and sort of saying I've had enough of hearing about it as well. You know, it was in no way supposed to be a celebration of it.
Right.
It was supposed to be, you know, just keep this person away from me. You know, they're sucking me, and you know,
right, because you don't want to be brought down with them.
Yeah. I just don't want to know. You know,
your feelings for them.
Which sometimes just like gets lost in people's interpretation of it, which winds me up. But that's life.
Right.
You know, people like to dwell on the bad things.